All right, I'm resident of Collinwood, Jewel Saints, and joining me today is John Phillip Bettencourt. Today, 5 years ago, he started a blog called The Return of Dark Shadows. So, and I've been following this thing 5 years ago today. Take me on this trip 5 years ago, starting this.
Hello?
Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry about that.
That's right. What I was saying was, take me on that. 5 years ago today, you started this journey for the Return of Dark Shadows. You started this story. Take me back 5 years. What what caused you to start this amazing story?
It actually started not today. The day that was the first day that I was posted, but it actually started on Halloween night, the same year, 2015. Where I was watching the Dark Shadows binge on on TV. They basically had a Dark Shadows marathon on. And I was sitting there watching it, and I was thinking, wow, like I wonder, like I remember the show from when I was little. I watched it on Sci-Fi, and I wondered, like, no one had ever made any kind of like new version of it. I had never seen the 1991 version
Mm-hmm.
to up until that point. So then I did started doing my research because I thought, well, it'd be really great if there was like a new version of it or a continuation story of it. And so I kind of started reading and learning more of the characters. And yeah, and then that's when I started coming up with the idea. Slowly but surely, I came up with a little bit of a plot line, and I picked about 3 or 4 of original characters to sort of start it out at, and then I started to build around that.
And you start this with Jack Thorne, Carolyn's husband, who they were living in London. She had moved to London, and this story, the story you dropped here for the final series, was a in many ways it was a prequel to the events that started your story.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So what I wanted to do with this final series was sort of go back a little bit because throughout all the series, all 13 of them, there are gaps. There are gaps between, from the original show through the 80s, through the 90s, and there's gaps in those years. And I wanted to fill in each one so that at the point that you finish series 13, you sort of know exactly what's happened since, um, in my version of the event, since 1972. So if you knew the show from that ended in 1972 apart from parallel time, you kind of can connect the dots from there to my story. And so we have the 1980s that I kind of reference in 13, and the 90s, and also there are gaps that I filled in 1966 when I did series 12. So it sort of all fills in together. And also throughout the rest of the series, I go back and forth through time explaining Claudia and her connection to Barnabas.
You did a lot of explaining with each character in this series. You made sure to connect every dot, every nook, every cranny.
I
And
did my very best.
my question to you, well, and I know we're rehashing a little bit the first interview I did with you, but what made you choose to start this with Carolyn and her husband?
So when I watched the show back when it was on Sci-Fi, and then when I rewatched again in 2015 on the Decades Network, that Halloween marathon, there was something about Carolyn that I really liked. I liked that she was sort of a firecracker. She sort of was the piece of the family that I'm not really sure how to explain it. She was not crazy in the sense that she was like going through so much turmoil in her head like her mom was. She wasn't a mess like Roger and David. She was sort of the level-headed Collins throughout the beginning. And then we get Barnabas, and that sort of like throws her off. Later on in the series, he kind of gets obsessed with her a little bit. But I really liked her. I really liked that she was sort of the level-headed one in the family, sort of trying to slap people into their senses and saying, don't let so and so do this to you. The Jason Maguire storyline really interested me, so I liked her a lot. I like characters like that. She's strong. She's powerful, and I thought about when I thought about um, what would happen, or where would the family be now she would be alive. She would be older but alive, and of course she'd probably have kids or a husband or something, couple of husbands here and there. So I did really always intend to start with her, but I didn't want her to be like Elizabeth, living in the house all these years. I sort of wanted her to hate her past and hate her family in a way. Not necessarily hate her family, but regret the things that happened in her life. And so I wanted her to have a distance. And so London to me was the only option, because London's sort of gloomy and dark too. So I wanted to put her in a place where she would feel sort of at home, but at the same time, an ocean away from what she remembered. So the pieces start to fall around her, basically, in her life. David comes in much later, about a year later. I think, yeah, in 2016 is when David shows up. But I wanted there to be a mystery around David. I wanted people not really know about him. So those two characters, David and Carolyn, obviously are the youngest members of the family, and things would have to revolve around them. But David had to be a mystery for a really long time. So basically, it was all about Carolyn for a while.
I like how in series 13 we get David's story of how he went to Wyncliffe with this final sort of prequel conclusion in a way. I love how you piece together David going to Wyncliffe, Kimberly's involvement with the OTH. Talk to us about making sure to connect this to not just your beginning story, but to everything you did for these past 5 years.
The way I always looked at this whole project was that there's no show on TV right now that is the continuation of this story that we love so much. There's nothing on TV. There hasn't been anything. There's been a lot of remakes, and there's been a lot of not a lot, but a couple attempts to recreate something that everybody already loves. Like, we already love the original, but they tried it again in '91 and tried it again in '04, and the movie. There was nothing that really stood out to me that could be the continuation of this family. And so David's life, I wanted to keep secret for a really long time. His whole life as a kid was a mess. He had a really strange relationship with his father, and his mom was, non-existent basically his whole life. And what I wanted to do with him and bring that out is I wanted to create a story that was like a TV show where you can come in, read a chapter, that's an episode of a TV show, come back next week and see what happens next. And each one of those is a thread. So each series connects to the next one. So series 1 is like, it connects to 2, connects to 3. And so that you can start somewhere and continue reading, and it's like a loop. So it's like coming into your favorite TV show every week and finding out what happens next and finding out what happens next. And so I kind of devised this whole thing where Mondays would be the new chapter, Wednesdays would be sort of the remember to pick up on your episode thing, and then Friday would be the reminder that next week is a new chapter. So I kept doing this whole thread so that people would keep coming back, just like your favorite TV show, because I know how much people loved coming back to that TV show every day. And that's sort of how I sort of sewed all these storylines together. It's one big fabric, one big quilt.
In series 13, well, series 12, really, we're introduced to Justin Patterson, who is Sheriff George Patterson's son, and he goes missing because he's bit by a vampire. And a lot of it has to do with India D'Archo and her traveling back in time and him trying to help her. But what I found interesting was Justin calling himself Leopold, and Leopold was a character you had introduced way back when you made Jack Thorne Leopold. And I really loved what you did with the character of Leopold, not just in, chapter 1, but with chapter 13, that this whole time he's been Justin Patterson.
Right. So there was, in the beginning, like you mentioned, series 1, Claudia falls in love
Right.
with this man that shows up, and she sort of sees something about him that reminds her of this man that she loved a long, long time ago. And throughout the whole series, the reader never knows who this Leopold is. I mention him. I mention how he dies sort of in the second or third, maybe the fourth chapter of series one. I mentioned that he dies. I mentioned that he, she was, it was a love of her life and all this stuff. And you never really, that's it. That was the end of that. She does turn Jack into him because she's sort of, that was my sort of way of mirroring the Angelique Barnabas thing. That was how it started. Like, she turns Barnabas into a vampire. Claudia reverses that and changes her lover into a vampire, or this man that she thinks reminds her of a vampire that she once knew, or a man. We don't even know at that point that Leopold was a vampire. But she turns Jack into this person that she once knew, and I kind of go back a little bit and I talk about it's very quick. I think it's chapter 3 where she, again, I create this little tiny story of who Leopold was, but never again do I go back to who this man really, really was. So when I was writing 13, I thought about connecting Claudia to somebody and maybe throwing in where Leopold's origin comes from. And then that's where I was like, oh, there's Justin, and maybe Justin can be this person that she fell in love with. And then there was the fact that India was sort of his love, and I had to write around how to get rid of India so that he could connect to Claudia so that Justin can then be Leopold. So it was all these little dots that I had to put together so that in the end you figure out that, oh my gosh, the guy Claudia fell in love with in series 1, or who she thinks Jack is all the way back in 13. That's where he was. That's where this quote-unquote Leopold was, who this man was. So then you get that connection to series 1.
In the beginning, in the series, in your beginning series, part of the series, we're introduced to many characters, many new characters, many new faces. We're introduced to Alexandra Thorne, Carolyn's daughter, and in series 13, and I'm not trying to jump. I'm just trying to. You introduce us to Cameron Frame, and Cameron Frame is the son of Bo and Carolyn. Bo from chapter 13, or sorry, chapter 12, who was a private investigator slash detective hired by Arabella Stoddard, I want to say, but to investigate the Collins family. And Carolyn and him were in love, and they made love, and they had a child in the 60s. And by the end of series 13, you made Cameron Loomis McGovern. He became Loomis McGovern in every way, shape, and form because he wanted this new life, this new identity. Talk to us about just going through all that process.
Cameron was actually one of my favorites because he is sort of, in a way, very, very, how do I say it? He reminds me a lot of Victoria in the sense that he doesn't know he's a part of this family. He
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know who he really is. He just knows that he's related to his aunt Noelle, right? He thinks his parents are dead. He has no idea that he's connected to this family by blood. And so, and my idea was that he's a lot like Victoria in that sense, where she doesn't know her past, she doesn't really know a lot about herself, she only knows what she's been told, and Cameron's the same way. And so when he finally does discover that he is connected to this family, there in the earlier chapters when he does discover that in 13, there's a sense of kind of relief that he does know who he is, but by the end he has a change of heart. He decides that there's just no way that he can be a part of this family that's connected to his father's death, that's connected to his mother or his aunt's death, that's connected to so much darkness in his whole life ever since he found out. So there's just no way that he can be that person. So he decides to reinvent himself and go a different way. And I thought that was important because, for one, I didn't really have a backstory for Loomis in the beginning. He was just sort of this cop who was connected to town, and he was just there. And I wanted something more for him at the end because I haven't really used him since 8 or 9 or even 7, Series 7, I think. So I wanted him to have a backstory, but I didn't want to put him into Series 13 as himself. So I found a way to connect him to the story again through Cameron and making sure that we know that eventually Cameron does become the cop that kind of tries to save Kat. Kat is his partner in the
Mm-hmm.
earlier chapters, and because he knows who his family is, Loomis knows, Loomis knows, but no one else knows who he is. Can't really eventually, he loses track of Carolyn. Karen loses track of him. So when she does come back in series 1, she has no idea that Loomis is Cameron.
It's interesting because Kat is Loomis isn't just the driving force for the investigation. In many ways, Kat is. She gets the idea to sort of sneak into the Collins family. To
Seduce Caleb.
seduce Caleb and be his date. And then Leopold is a huge X factor in her memory loss and attacks her. And they actually arrest Caleb because they think he did it. And by this time, you had introduced Barnabas. You didn't introduce Barnabas right away, which I love.
Right.
You were very patient with that factor. What made you be so patient with that?
I think because everybody was expecting. I mean, the story of Dark Shadows is all about. There's two factors, right? There's the Barnabas fans and there's the Quentin fans.
Right.
And I was a Barnabas fan. I didn't really see a lot of Quentin episodes until much later. But so I grew up with the sci-fi stuff of Barnabas. I didn't really know Quentin until much later. Again, like I said. So I knew that creating this story, people were going to think Barnabas was going to be the first one. It's going to be all about Barnabas. And we have to remember that Barnabas doesn't really come into the real story of the show even until way later.
Right.
And it's sort of a good kind of like tease. It's coming. It's coming. I mention him all the time. People talk about him. Carolyn mentions him. She scares shit of him. She knows he's around. She feels him all the time. They have that connection together. And so I think that was kind of like my way of drawing people in to find out, was he ever going to bring Barnabas? Like, I got to find out now. Carolyn keeps thinking about him. So when is he coming? When is he coming? And finally, a huge storm comes at the end of Series 2. And the very first chapter of Series 3, Barnabas walks in to, there's a blackout in town and the lights flicker on and there's Barnabas standing in the middle of the foyer.
Yeah, it was a great introduction the way you did that, and it sort of just like everybody wondering who that was, and then Carolyn coming to the realization when the lights came on. It was very, very well done. When you made all these new characters, Alexander Thorne, Jack Thorne, obviously, Christopher Reed, every character you made just was amazing. You gave them such a deep arc. So you're welcome. So what went behind sort of the OTH and Victor Reed, bad Victoria winners? What went behind all that?
The OTH was a way for me to introduce Vicky. Again, it's sort of the same way with Barnabas. I didn't want to just throw Vicky back in just like that. Everyone would probably, if everyone was waiting for Barnabas in the story, if they were reading it, they were probably also waiting for Vicky because she was also the big star of the show. So I didn't want to bring her back either, just like that. We also don't know what really happened to her from the show. She just kind of time travel, disappears, that kind of stuff. And that was a blessing and a curse. Because a blessing because then I could write something, and a curse because it would be hard for people to believe it. Like I really genuinely wanted Dark Shadows fans to read each chapter and really like it and really think of it as the progression of the story. So a lot of people would not want Vicky to be evil as I was planning to do it. But in doing my research, the actress Alexandra Isles had said that if she wanted to come back, or if she was going to come back, as they offered her back in this early, I think, mid-60s when she left at first, that she wanted to sort of be a villain somehow. She would want Vicky to be villainized in a way. And, of course, they said no, that wasn't going to happen. So I thought, well, why not, grant her a wish? Why not make Vicky a little bit bad for a minute? Wouldn't she be upset with this family after finding out that she really was part of their family, that they sort of denied her in a way? I mean, they didn't really deny her, but at the same time they did, because no one really accepted her as an actual blood member of the family. They just thought she was sort of an honorary member because she lived with them for so long. But wouldn't she have resentment? Wouldn't she be angry? Wouldn't she be sort of vengeful and try to get a piece of that pie that she so well deserved? After all those years, good Vicky might have hardened, might have become a little bit angry or jaded about that. And especially all the suffering that she did when she did go back in time and no one believed her and she was almost killed 1,000 times and all these different things that happened to her. I imagine somebody would be a little pissed off over the years. So that was my entrance. How would Vicky come back? What would she do? Well, I devised this whole thing that she knows obviously that Barnabas is what he is, and she creates this sort of vampire hunting organization that goes around and does the good work, as they say in the early chapters. And the Collins family is the bullseye. That is their like prize piece to get rid of all of these people who they believe, aka Vicky, who she believes is the bane of her existence. She is dark because of them, and she wants to get rid of all of those people. So, she employs Victor. She also employs Sebastian, which is Maggie's son. Later
Mm-hmm.
on, we figure that out. And she also she brainwashes Caleb later on to kill everybody. So she hates this family. She hates all of them, and she does some terrible things. She goes back and forth through time a couple of times, and of course, Vicky can never stay evil forever. I would never do that. So she does repent and come back and do some good later on.
I think it was very interesting and wickedly good twisted that you took this character, this squeaky clean character, and turned it on its ear, because that's sort of the mark of every sort of actor or actress. Like when you write a character, I'll use Henry Fonda as a great example. For years, people might know Fonda played a lot of his career as good guys, babyface. But in 1969, he decides to play the villainous Frank, and it's one of the best. It's, to me, in my opinion, it's his best performance because he plays a heel, and he's a real son of a bitch. And when I read your Victoria winners, I'm thinking, man, it was so well written. And this whole series has been, I've told you, you've done an amazing job, and you've really captured every character, and you captured her. You made sure to make me go, man, she's a real bitch. And that's the first thing I said when I read that. I'm like, man, she's a real bitch. And I love how you gave her an ability, a special power too with that. What went behind the time traveling ability?
I thought about the way the show did the time travel and how they used objects. Like there was a staircase, there was other things that helped Barnabas and Julia travel, and then of course the seance. And I kind of didn't want to copy that because again, I didn't want there to be almost identical storylines going on where another seance would make somebody time travel or find a staircase. I didn't want to try. I didn't want to repeat things that they had done because then I don't know if it would be as fun to write. I don't know if it'd be as fun to read thinking that he's just using another staircase, that kind of thing. So I thought about, well, what if she just learned that she has this ability now and stuck with her? It's sort of like kind of like toxic fumes. Maybe she became almost like a superhero. You fall in toxic acid or whatever, and you just retain these powers because of it. Maybe that stayed with her. Maybe she figured out a way that she can actually bend time because she was doing it for so many years. So I thought, well, why not? Why not give her that ability? Maybe she could. Maybe that's been inside of her all this time. That she can bend time and space with her mind, just do as she wanted. And so that's what I did. I just thought, why not? Vicky can do anything.
When I read that, I looked at it from a reader standpoint. I looked at it from a willpower standpoint. She willed herself back and forth. She was able to control it, like you said, bend it. I think that was so creative to do, because to give a villain that sort of ability, and then turn her face, it was gutsy, and that's something Dan Curtis did with Dark Shadows too. He took chances. He didn't play it safe, and you didn't either. Throughout these 5 years, you took many risks and chances. Not just Vicky, but you brought the Phoenix back as well.
Yeah, it's Series 7. was all about Anna Tate, aka Laura.
Yep.
I thought that was important too because she's a big part of David's life, and about a big part of his story is about the fact that his mom is, you know, a lot of things. She's his mother. She's this phoenix, this immortal being that comes back every 100 or so years. She's also, um, you know, this a real person, but not a real person in a way. And he's a product of her. He is her child. So, and there's also not a lot of there's a lot of unfinished business with her because again, she's written off and she dies. But does she come back again? They use her in the show again in the past, like in the past stories, the other incarnations of Laura, but not ever again in the future or in the present, 1966 through 71 stories. So I thought, well, what if she does finally come back one more time and say, you know what, this is it, I'm taking my kid back, even though he's a grown ass man, I'm taking him back. And so I had to figure out a way to bring her back in a way that they wouldn't necessarily recognize her. And so I devised the character of Anna Tate, who is not Elizabeth, Carolyn's goddaughter, who's an actress in California. She comes to the East Coast for a film shoot or something. I don't remember exactly what I said, but she comes to the East Coast to stay with the family, and it's really Laura in disguise. She's another reincarnation of Laura Laura Collins. She's there to take back David.
I like how you did it too, because here's the thing with Laura in the 66 series, and even with your version, to her, possession is law. Possession is 9/10. Like you said, it's it's he's hers. So I really, it, you had everything in this. I mean, literally, and which that's something I found amazing going through this. It's like, man, there's everything in here that you could want. You even had werewolves. You had Christopher Reed, obviously, and his mother Kimberly. Talk to us about Kimberly making her son a werewolf.
So this goes along with the OTH, the Organization of the True Hearted. They have come up with a weapon to get rid of the quote unquote vampire family or the dark family, and they know that the lichen, the wolf, is the best way to get rid of them and kill them quickly. But it's a slow process, and they're using a secret DNA serum that they're injecting into this baby, or that they have. And it begins where Christopher's already an adult, and he's already sort of forming himself into the werewolf. And Victor, his father, is using him. He's sort of uh, guiding his life and making him this sort of super weapon against his family until the right moment. The right moment comes as a surprise to Victor. The moon comes out and Christopher's like powers sort of um, explode in a way that Victor couldn't control, and he probably didn't realize wouldn't be able to control because at that point, um, if you look back at Series 13 that just ended, no one had ever. They were injecting David with that serum, and he had never really transformed to the werewolf. He sort of was losing his mind, but he didn't go that far. So as when they did it to the baby, as he grew up into Christopher, it hadn't gotten to full blown crazy werewolf. So Victor didn't realize how powerful it would become. And so there is a full moon, and Christopher transforms and wreaks havoc on his father, on Collinsport. He kills a couple people, kills his own dad. So it just sort of backfires on him.
Right, in series, what John is talking about in Series 13, the OTH and Victor Reed,
He's
it's
sort of the
heavy.
main henchman.
Right. Victor Reed is the main henchman. That's the heavily involved story of the Series 13, and he has Christopher Jennings' serum DNA, and he is actually, I think, Jennings' son, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
He is Amy's son, so
Or
Christopher's nephew.
Amy's son, sorry. Christopher's nephew, my apologies. But
That's okay.
he he has this serum, and they, like you said, he has Kimberly inject David, and it makes, David's never experienced anything like this. It just makes him go crazy, and he ends up, killing Noelle by accident. And now they do accuse him of killing. Well, Kimberly does accuse him of killing Elizabeth, but we know that's not true. Kimberly's sort of involved in that, but it to tie that into your early seasons through through series 13 and to make sure that was in there, I thought was really well done. And you have Victor Reed, even though I don't read about him until this again until series 13. To me, as soon as I heard the name Victor Reed, I said, that son of a bitch.
Well, we know he's a horrible person from. He's only in the first two, right? He's in the first
Right.
two, and then and then 13. So he does a lot of horrible things in the first two, enough for us to hate him. And then when we were reminded of him in series 13, where we sort of know him more, we already know, oh, this guy's up to no good. He's gonna pretty much throw everything, on its ear. We know what to expect from him once we reintroduce him in 13.
I have a question for you. It's sort of a strange one. Is there a character, in your opinion, that from a fictional sense, you just can't turn bad or just can't turn good?
That I can't turn bad. I cannot turn. Oh well, I did. I was gonna say I can't turn Maggie bad, but I kind of made her a werewolf.
Well, she wasn't bad,
But
bad, really.
yeah, and she didn't. Yeah, and she didn't mean to. And she did sort of, gang up with the other two. Remember, there was, what was it, 11 or 10? That there was like three werewolves, and they were like a team of werewolves.
Yeah,
So
but
and they did good things. So they did good stuff. So yeah, I really think Maggie is sort of an angel character. She's always there to support her friends and her in this family that she's known forever. So I would never make her a villain in the sense as Vicky. And I wouldn't make. Who would I make good? Who could I not make good? That's a good question. I don't think I would make. Wow, that is a really tough one. Because I think with every evil character, there's always something good in them in the beginning, and something made them bad. And if something made the villain bad, but a good person, nothing really would make someone good. I don't know. That's a really tough question. I'll think about that. So the first part is I would never make Maggie evil as I did Vicky. She would be
right,
evil by accident, like the werewolf curse. But I don't know about the reverse though. Make someone good turn. I mean, make someone bad turn good. I don't know.
right. It's to the equivalent of there's characters you can't turn good, and there's characters you can't turn bad. It's
Yeah,
it.
because even my good characters, they did bad things. Like Alex did bad things. She was possessed, but she did
Right,
bad things. So yeah, there's everybody has good and evil in them.
right. I love how that Alexandra gets Claudia's powers early on, and Claudia is having a relationship with Christopher Reeve, who Alexandra is trying to have a relationship with.
There's a little love triangle. Yeah.
Yeah, you had that so well done that there's all this tension, relationship tension. How were you able to just write that so well?
I think it goes. This is a little embarrassing, but it goes along with watching a lot of soap operas when I was little. We didn't have cable when I was growing up until I was about 16. So when we would come home from school, or if we went into late for school or whatever, we only had like, I lived in the Central Valley of California, and there was only like 8 channels, 9 channels. We didn't have like what it is now, where there's 100,000 channels. We didn't. So there was a lot of soaps on during the early 90s, and that's what we watched sort of when we got home. It was the last couple of ones before the news, and if I stayed home sick or whatever, that was what was on. And then later on, we got cable when I was about 15, 14, and that's when we got, all those other channels, and I found Dark Shadows, and I found a lot of other stuff. But that's kind of what happened, is you just learn to observe these weird relationships on those shows, that just anything could happen in a relationship on a soap opera. And Dark Shadows, many people refuse to acknowledge it, it was a soap. It just had a lot of other fun elements to it, but it was a soap. There was relationships and romance, and there was all this kind of like melodrama. Aside from the really gothic and horror aspects to it, there was a lot of melodrama and slapping. I mean, there's that famous Julia slapping Cassandra across the face. That's so soap opera. I mean, that's what I also liked about the show, was that it had both sides. It had these kind of soapy elements like that, where Cassandra gets slapped by Julia, and there's also the supernatural part that I adore. So that's kind of where my reference point is exactly Dark Shadows, the show, have these melodramatic, soapy relationships like Alex and Christopher in love, and then a witch comes along and tries to steal her man. I mean, how Dark Shadows is that? It's perfect.
Right. There's a question I once asked a friend of mine too. That what does Dark Shadows, Guiding Light, and Days of Our Lives in Professional Wrestling all have in common? And he said, "What?" I said, "They're all soap operas." And,
I've heard that wrestling is sort of like the straight man soap.
It's a male soap opera, and
Exactly.
that's sort of the short answer I'll give. It's supposed to have everything rolled in it. It has everything a soap opera has in it. It just to some degree to maybe more extreme because they're on prime time. But
Right.
so well, depending on when you're watching that too, because the writers aren't. I'll say this: wrestling sometimes is very consistent, and sometimes they're very an inconsistent soap opera. But they don't have you as a writer, so that's why they have that problem. But and they don't have sorry they don't have great writers who are consistent, and I think that's a problem too. You were very very consistent with your stuff. 5 years you put. I think anybody who's read this can tell how much time and effort and dedication you put into this. And the one thing I want to ask you about and talk to you about is Maggie and David in the asylum. Those years were that chapter was very well done.
It's also a big window to write more. I only gloss over it. I kind of gloss over it in 13. I go back and talk about how he sees her and he kind of recognizes her, but she goes, and I also gloss over it in when I bring Maggie back in, I think series 6 or 5. So
Right.
when she comes back, I also talk about that, but it's sort of reversed. So in Maggie's, or in series 5 or 6, again I can't remember, but we'll say 6. In series 6, when I bring Maggie back, we see her life through her eyes at the Wyncliffe, and I explain how she got there in the 80s. And then in series 13, we see her through David's eyes, and
Right.
so he doesn't know anything about who she is, or I mean, he knows it's Maggie, but he doesn't know how she got there, or what she's even doing there. He's drugged up and he's kind of confused. So there is still a big story about that too. Could always, I mean, you and I have talked about there are so many different branches that we can continue to write the story over again and again and again, and not repeat ourselves, because there's so many different characters that we can branch off to and write more about. And I'm sure the people who write the audio dramas do the same thing. And there's just a lot of different meat that people can sink their teeth into about all of these different characters. And Maggie at Wyncliffe would be really fun, but again, you never know.
I think you've done a really nice job with this, and I really like too that you did do time traveling in this.
I almost didn't. I almost didn't, because I thought, oh, the show did it a lot. They did it, I think, 4 times or maybe 3. I can't. I don't know. They went to the beginning. They went again in 1895, and then again in the 1800s, and then they went to 1995, and then there was parallel time, and they did it a lot. And I'm probably in the minority. I hate the parallel time stuff. It just drives me crazy because it's so confusing to connect the family members together, and it's just really confusing to me. So that part of the original story is not in my collective. It doesn't exist in my universe. Everything else does.
Right.
That's the only part I didn't put in, because again, there's so many members of this family, and to connect them together to create a cohesive story is very difficult. And so I thought, well, I'm never going to time travel. If I do, it'll be just a one chapter thing, or maybe just a series thing. And so I did that one time travel to 1920 with when Vicky steals the baby when she's bad. Vicky's evil and she steals the baby, and she time travels to 1920. And I thought, okay, that's it. I'm just gonna do that. That'll be it. I don't want to keep going back and forth. But then I thought, what else can I do? At one point, Series 10 came, and I was like, oh man, like, what am I gonna do next? What else can I do? What can I say? What else haven't I done? And that's when Series 12 came, with going back to 1966 and sort of reinventing that storyline and adding a little bit. And that's the thing I was like, okay, that's the only way I'll do Tribe Chapel, if I'm able to go back and sort of add my own elements to it, and sort of reconstruct something a little bit and play with it a little bit more than they did on TV. So then I did that. And then after Series 11 ended, I had to get India back. India was just she was stuck. So then 13 came, and I was like, well, I gotta get her back home.
Yeah, I love how you had her travel through time, and I love who sent her back. Claudia sends her back, and I found that really, really interesting. There's a lot of things that happen in your series. Caleb and Kat eventually go away with their child, and we never hear from them again. We have Claudia who she leaves. She's frustrated with Barnabas, and that's sort of what she's been her whole life. Is at one point in time she was wanting to kill him. um, so I have a question. Why never bring? Well, Claudia came back in series 13, but like as a prequel. But why never bring those characters back?
That's a really good question that I don't have the answer to. I just think that I kept writing all these different, more interesting people, and I didn't want to keep writing for the same ones over and
Mm-hmm.
over. So then Quinn came along, and Sabrina came along, and Serena, and so I kind of I did start to move to different directions. I opened up Maggie's storyline a little bit with her son and Serena and the Shaw guys. Andrew showed up, and Jeffrey. So opening up other people became fun, and always going after Claudia, always going after Kat, because Kat, for I think 8 series straight, she was sort of the heroine. Everything happened to her, and that kind of got boring. And I thought, well, somebody else has to get a spotlight somehow. And so I started to move things around. And so you're right, Caleb and Kat do go away, and Claudia actually goes after them.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you remember, they have her son.
Right.
The babies were switched. So she goes after them because they have her kid.
Yeah, and she's not happy with it. She's not
happy.
No, she doesn't sit well with her. And it made sense too that she shouldn't. It shouldn't sit well with her. It's her son. It's her child. So
she knows what it's like to be just given away.
Right. She was given away by her father to an orphanage of nuns, and I really, again, you always find a way to connect characters' events with other events, with emotional events that resemble things that have either happened to them or that do happen to them, and it makes them think about their past events. You were always able to do that.
Isn't that what happens in our own lives? Like when something happens to us, or when we see something happen on TV, we're like, oh, and we kind of can relate to something that happens to someone else, or we kind of relive our own mistakes in a way that kind of happens in real life. Sometimes we do the same thing over and over again. We date the same type of person. We, a lot of stuff that we repeat in our own lives, cycles, and that's kind of what I wanted to create with them, is that cycles happen. A father gives away his daughter, and then that daughter has a baby, and that baby is taken away. And what's going to happen to that baby? Does he think that she gave him away? And it's a cyclical thing. Everything happens in circles, and that's exactly how I wrote the story. The story ends where it begins.
I do have. I think it with Dark Shadows with the original. I don't think I would have ever turned Angelique face, ever. With
you wouldn't turn her.
I wouldn't have. I think I know I did. I'm sort of hypocriting myself, but if it would have been the Laura Parker Angelique, I would have never turned her baby face. Because they did.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
The sort of, because I asked you who would, if is there a good guy you can't turn heel, or is there a heel you can't turn baby face? If it was Laura Parker's, I wouldn't have.
You're so right, and I kind of did that right at the end of Angelique's story, she does sort of become good. Remember, she gives up all her powers to be with
Right.
Curtis. So you're right, I did do that. But you never know. Angelique's sort of sneaky. She she might come back and say she has no powers, but a witch is a witch is a witch.
Yeah, you can't really trust what Angelique says, because what she says and what she does is totally two different things.
She's only looking out for herself throughout her whole life.
I agree, 1000%. Is there is there a character that you maybe created or you wanted to create for this and didn't?
Ooh, another hard one. I think I mean I created a lot of weird people. I mean I created that the witch nun Bufflum.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun. I wish I could have written more for her. I created Claudia was a witch. I wanted she was like the daughter of a witch and a vampire. That was really fun. Um, that's a really tough question because there's not a lot of there aren't a lot of supernatural characters that you can create that are sort of unique. Um, Everything's kind of already been done. You're either a magical, powerful sorcerer, which is the same as a witch in a way. A vampire is sort of the same thing. So that's a tough question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to
It's okay, take your time. But
that.
let me see. I'm trying to think of another question. You So Carolyn's life in London with Alexandra. Carolyn had a lot of relationships. Did have one with Jack Thorne, but then she has one with another man who ends up being goodness, Jason McGuire,
The zombie.
right?
Yeah. So she, poor Carolyn. So she has a lot of issues. She is, she married to Jack. She loves Jack. She ends up uh, having to marry Jonathan Silva, who is really the zombie Jason McGuire, who another witch brings back to life because wow, it's a long story. But he comes back and he basically um, comes back to torment her because of what Elizabeth did to him. So she does get married to him, but Barnabas saves the day and kills him, and she's finally free of that guy.
Yeah, Barnabas is in your story, and I like that how you used him. I think you always kept your story fresh, and I think when I asked you, why they never came back, but when they left, it's not that when I read it, it's not that it's not that it wasn't interesting, because it was. You kept it interesting even though those characters were gone. So you were able to, from my opinion, from my this reader's opinion, you were able to keep readers interested even though those characters weren't in the story anymore. They were referenced, they were talked about, but they never came back.
Yeah, there's again it goes back with sort of what happens in your own life. Like
Right.
your friends can move away, your family can moves away. That doesn't mean you forget them or they just cease to exist. You talk to them on the phone or a letter, or they exist somewhere. You talk to them. They're in your heart in a way, too. So it's sort of the way life goes. I wanted to kind of mimic that in the story, that sometimes people in your life do move away, but other people come in. And even though there's this ebb and flow of people coming in and out of your life, especially in Collinsburg, the drama's still there. There's always this sort of this flow of crazy stuff that's happening around this family, and sometimes new family members come in. There's India who comes in towards the end,
Mm-hmm.
and she's probably had a normal life up until then, and then as soon as she gets to know her family, she's sucked into this time warp thing. So it is definitely having to do with being a member of the family or a closest friend of the family that links you to all this supernatural stuff. But if somebody did leave, I never left a hole. Somebody else came in and filled that hole, however it was. Sometimes someone came back to life, or came back, um, from Trip or whatever. Everybody came in to win, but yeah, I try to do my best to keep everything busy and the storylines always as interesting as possible.
Talk to us about Gabriel Del Archo. Sorry.
Gabriel, I named him after the Archangel Gabriel, and that's sort of what he is for his sister Dominique. He protects her. He's her best friend, and she entrusts. She passes away, and she entrusts her daughter to him, and so he's literally a supernatural character. He has a power to protect and to heal, and he's there to really, quite literally, watch over India as she grows up. She ends up deciding that he is going to allow her to meet her father, her birth father, not knowing what's really going to happen. He eventually starts to see what is behind this Collins family, who she's related to, who his niece is related to, in the form of seeing Barnabas in visions, and all this stuff sort of starts to piece together, and he's worried about her and isn't really sure he wants her to be a part of this family after all. But that was sort of a way to introduce Claudia. I had to introduce somebody else first to then introduce Claudia. David had to know India through somebody. So it's always a piece of a puzzle. David was connected to Gabriel, who was connected to Dominique, who was connected to India.
Who was the hardest character for you to kill off?
Arabella. I really like Arabella. Arabella Stoddard. She's really fun. She's such a wit. She's horrible. She's an evil character, but not somebody who's supernatural, and that's what I really liked about her. She was evil just by nature. She wasn't evil by supernatural ways. I really liked her. And then killing her off, I had to do that because she didn't exist anywhere else, so she had to go. But I did really miss her.
I'm gonna give two, and both of mine are heels. Leopold,
Okay.
Leopold, and Jeffrey Shaw. Even though I
Oh,
called
Jeffrey. I
every
agree with you
time,
on Jeffrey.
yeah, every time, even though every time I read the chapters for Jeffrey Shaw, I called him an asshole, but he was a lovable asshole.
They always do. All the bad people always do something evil, but in a way that they're trying to do good. You know what I mean? He wanted to bring his son back to. Well, his son wasn't dead, but his son was really, really sick. So he wanted to bring his son, some health. So it was sort of a good thing, but he was doing it in a really bad way.
Right.
Leopold, he had to die because Barnabas was coming back, and I could not have two vampires. At the time, I didn't think it was feasible to have two vampires, especially when one of them is Barnabas. People adore Barnabas Collins. I couldn't make him have some kind of an enemy who's exactly like him and have that carry on for too long. So that would never last very long.
I get why you did it. I'm just he's killing. What? No. What? But I think I get why you did it, because you don't want to have two characters mirror each other, too.
Right.
And even though they were different, two vampires could get conflicting. But I love how you did.
Especially when
Sorry, go ahead.
especially when one's Barnabas. He's the star of the show, really, right? He's the big draw. So having somebody else like that, being Leopold, the other person, is sort of I don't think people would really want to have that in their story. I think they just really want to focus on Barnabas Collins. So yeah, Leopold could not last forever.
Nah, I love how you had three. You had Andrew, you had Maggie, you had three werewolves going after Angelique, and I love the battle sequence that you had.
The battle royale outside the old house.
Yeah, yeah.
She was she just did a lot of bad things that series. She did horrible things to everybody. She was making people go crazy. She was doing everything she could to control and be as powerful as she could. And there had to be one vampire or one werewolf could not take her out. It had to be a pack of werewolves to take out Angelique.
But that makes sense though too, because you have somebody who's so strong, so you need more than one strong force.
Exactly.
So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was one hell of a fight, and it was really entertaining to read. Is there any one thing you wanted to do with this series that maybe you didn't do or didn't get to do?
And 13
It just in all
or
of it.
and all of it. Um, yeah, I mean, I really do wish that I could have maybe dug deeper into Quinn. Quinn is Julia's granddaughter. That would have been kind of cool. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot that could be written about Julia's whole life. There's a lot. Again, I could write about Maggie's time in the '80s. Again, I barely even mentioned the '80s. There's just little blips of it throughout.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that could be all about Maggie because Carolyn's out of the country. David's at Wycliffe, so there's a lot that could be written about them. I think I mentioned this to you in a comment in a chat we had about bringing back Caleb and Kat because of the baby situation. That was never resolved. The baby switch was never resolved. So that would be kind of interesting to write about, but it's a lot of work.
And there's also India's uncertain future. I mean,
Oh yes,
right?
totally. You're exactly right. There is. She's sent back to her regular timeline, but what happens when she meets her dad again? Does she get sucked back in? Is she just forever going to be sucked back into 1966? I mean, you're right. You're totally right. That's another one.
I think you've created one hell of a wonderful world going off of Dan Curtis's creation and creating your own characters and your own story arcs. It's been one hell of a ride. And when I read this, I was just like, man, this is really, really, really amazing. And I was like, man, I got to get a hold of the writers so I can talk to them and bring them on my channel.
I'm so glad you did.
But I, just everything you did was amazing. So I want to get before we get out of here, I want to give you the floor and go ahead and talk.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you, first of all, for constantly being such a wonderful, supportive friend. And, to have somebody who loves Dark Shadows so much as you do, like what I've done and what I've had for 5 years, what I've written for 5 years, is very, very, very important to me, and also very flattering. I thank you so much for everything you've done and getting the word out, helping me create this sort of tiny, tiny little speck of time where people who like the show have found it through not only the stuff that I posted, but honestly through stuff that you've done for me. So I really appreciate that from the bottom of my little Dark Shadows heart. Thank you so much for that. And I really want to thank everyone who's read any one chapter, half a chapter, all of the chapters. It means a lot to a writer, which Jewel, when someone reads your stuff and actually reacts to it and tells you they like it, or tells you they hate a character that they're supposed to hate, or tells you they love a character that they're supposed to love, or vice versa, loves a character that they're not supposed to love. That's good too. But the reaction and the the connection to people who are reading your stuff is super, super, super important. And it's very hard to kind of let go of Dark Shadows because all the other things that I've written outside of it doesn't get this sort of reaction through people. So I always find myself coming back because I like the interaction. I like hearing what people have to say. And so I will miss that. And I thank everybody who's ever given it a chance and stuck with it all these years. 5 years is a really long time to write something. And to read it too is a really long time. So that's amazing. And I appreciate every single chat I've had, every single comment, every single like, dislike, everything. It's been very, very, it's been amazing.
Are you going to keep the page up?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
The Facebook page is always going to be up because there's a lot of photos that I have that I haven't posted yet. There's a lot of stuff, and I like I said, it's hard to let go. I will let go, but I don't know for how long because I'll miss it. I definitely know I'll miss it.
What other stories are you working on?
I have so many ideas that I have not even. I have outlines of like 9 different stories. I just can't get myself to write them because it's a very. I don't write the other stories that I do like Dark Shadows. It's not a serial. It's not something I post chapter by chapter. I write the other ones as a whole piece. So it takes a lot longer. It's a lot more time consuming.
Is there any upcoming story you would like to plug?
No, but thank you for that. Or do you? You should plug your stuff.
Oh no, this
Totally
isn't
should.
this isn't about me. This is about interviewing you. So
And I will say you have chapter 2 of Space Marshal Mickey, which people should definitely read. It's very fun, super imaginative. Like I told you in private chats, I do not think I can write anything science fictiony like that, and that is so much. That's talent, because it's you taking your brain to a place that doesn't exist yet, and that is very important. I've never been able to do that. So,
I
Space Marshal Mickey chapter 2 is up. You guys should go pick that up and read it.
well,
And I think you have some Dark Shadow stuff too coming yourself.
yeah. Well, oh god, I don't even know what chapter I'm on. But the next chapter of Dark Shadows Bloodlust.
I think you're on chapter 4.
Yeah.
This one, Bloodlust.
Yeah, well, chapter 5 I think is coming here in about a week, because I'm writing one thing one week and the other next week. So I'm right. So I have Space Marshal Mickey up, like you said. The next chapter of Dark Shadows will be next week, and then a week after that you'll hear Space Marshal Mickey again.
That's a good way to do it. Yeah.
Which is
Space it out.
Which chapter 3 of his stories oh god, entitled Abandon, but so not but which I know what I'm doing there. I think the key with writing Outer Space, if anybody wants a key tip to it who's never done it, just
I've never done it. I can't.
Take planet Earth, crumble it up in a ball, and throw it away in your mind and pretend it doesn't exist, and just make everything else up on the fly. That's exactly how I do it.
That's very, very good, because basically you're saying the laws of whatever we know don't exist, right? You're making it up, that's a really good point, I think.
Well, that's the thing when you write. Dark Shadows sort of prepares a lot of this in many ways. Like take away the vampires, take away the werewolves, take away everything you've ever known. Take away the Halloweens, the Michael Myers, the Friday the 13th. Take a character that doesn't exist and set them wherever the hell you want. It doesn't have to be space, but if you make it space, I always felt like if I did space, when I did this, I said to myself, I'm not doing Earth, because if I do Earth, I'm going to confine myself. So I just blew Earth up.
That's a really good way to look at it, though, honestly.
But is there anything you want to say about your story? Please continue.
Just, it will be up forever. I will never delete anything. And again, you can begin at series 1, chapter 1, and it just takes you through a very, very long 140 chapter journey. It's a lot of chapters, but anyone can get through them. I didn't write them very long. So each chapter, there are some long ones, but each chapter is, enough to get you through a good 30 minutes. Each series can take you about 2 hours to read, maybe. But, it's all connected. You don't have to know anything of the show necessarily, but I just hope that everybody likes it. It's going to stay up, for sure.
I love the hell out of it. It's amazing. Do you think we'll ever see a mainstream Dark Shadows show again?
That's a tough one. I don't know, because I don't really know no one does. We don't know what the new show, what the plot was. We have no idea what the characters were. So I'm not sure if we would, because it's a tough question. I don't know what they had in mind, and whatever they had in mind was not liked. So that's, not knowing that X factor of what they wrote and what they wanted to create, other than it being like sort of a sequel, like what you and I have written.
Right.
And they didn't like it, so I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever see it.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer too. So it just hopefully I think one day we will. I think that's both everyone's hope. Both of ours especially, because we're big fans. So, is there anything you want to add more onto your series?
As far as more chapters?
Yes.
Perhaps.
Okay.
I'm gonna leave it at perhaps, because again, I never like I said, I'll miss it. I definitely know I'll miss it.
if there's any ever story you want to plug, please hit me up. I'll get you on the channel and you can plug another story, because I think what you've done with this has been so amazing. And I will gladly, gladly give you a plug for any other story you do, because you've done one hell of a job with this. And I
Thank you
mean
so
that
much again for everything.
from the bottom of my heart. It meant a lot to me to read this, because it's like, I'm like, God damn, I'm like, holy shit, this is good. But I want to thank John for coming on and giving me his time and letting me interview him, because he's done this many times with me. I want to thank you for writing this from one fan to another. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you again. I'm going to shout out to Mark too, our friend Mark, who's
Yep,
done a great job with his story too. He has a great story out there. If
yep.
he
The
would love to share
Phoenix.
it, he should again.
Yep, the Phoenix story Mark did was really, really
Yes,
good.
it was amazing. I mean, you two have such great imaginations that I'm in awe of the things you come up with. So, Mark and Jewel, I loved your stories too.
Yep, I love the psychology in Mark's Phoenix story.
Man,
I was like, wow, that was really good and
yes,
dark, right?
yeah. He has a way that I don't know how to explain it. It's very, very cerebral and beautiful almost. He has a really great way of writing. I loved it.
Right. There's all this. There's the beauty and there's the subtextual dark that he has, like, laying in wait, that you don't see, and it's
Yes.
so good. And it's like, when you see it, it's like, oh my god, that was like, you know. But yeah, Mark does a fabulous job too as a writer. So big shout out to Mark.
Very
And
good.
yep,
Yes.
very good. Um, but thank you again for coming on and joining me, guys.
Anytime.
Link to John's blog will be in the description box. I'm going to put chapter one in if you want to start at the beginning. You can get him at Pop Rag, at Return Shadows on Twitter. He's on Facebook. John Phillip Bettencourt. Give him a check out for sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming on, man. I enjoyed it.
All right. Good night.
Good night.